Well, of all the expectations we have for our schools, discipline can be one of the hardest subjects to master for some of those trying to learn it and for some of those trying to teach it. Bad behavior has consequences, and so does how we handle it. In fact, school suspensions emerged as one of the primary focuses of the Ferguson Commission. So tonight, what are those consequences for the short term, the long term, for the students, and for all of us? Stay tuned. Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. When you look at trends in school discipline over the past couple of decades, you might notice similarities to the approach our country has taken with crime. Often get tough, zero tolerance tactics, not just for guns in schools or violent fights, but suspensions for things like tardiness, dress code violations, disrespect, and defiance. And more schools have turned over discipline to police, when in the past they might have handled an issue in the school or with parents. But then again, the world and the burdens kids bring to school have changed too.
Discipline is necessary. You have to have some type of discipline and structure in your classroom, or kids will run over you, flat out. We can talk about, all the, these ideals and things of that nature, but 2 to 3 kids can totally disrupt 40 with no problem. So if you do not have structure and discipline, then nothing will be, the other 37, 36 kids will suffer.
When you were a first-year teacher, were you ready to deal with the issues you deal with at U City, for example?
No, absolutely not. And I haven't been in the game that long, but I don't feel like I've actually completed learning anything.
But has a disparity developed in our discipline? A nationwide study of the 2011-2012 school year showed that students of color and disabilities were overall disciplined at far higher rates than white students. And compared to other states, the study showed the discipline gap in Missouri is large. 27% of black high school students got out of school suspensions that year, compared to about 7% of white students. And in elementary schools, just under 2% of white children were suspended that year, compared to 14% of black children. The biggest racial disparity in grade schools in the entire country.
90% of our teachers are white women, and our student population across the country is 36% children of color. And we haven't had a race conversation in education.
Well, first of all, our thanks to Jim Kircher and our friends at St. Louis Public Radio. Those were snippets of a town hall hosted here at the 9 Network that will air this coming Monday, November 9th at 7 p.m. They've done a lot of reporting on this issue that we are tackling here tonight. We are tackling it with a panel of educators, but first we are starting with Norman White, Associate Professor at St. Louis University. And Norman, you're a criminologist, so correct?
Yes.
Tell me what a criminologist, what draws you to this work around school discipline?
In the field of criminology, what we find is that the kids who have trouble in school, who are failing out of school, tend to have been suspended earlier in their lives, and it's a developmental thing. So the earlier that begins to happen in their lives, the more likely they are to wind up running into justice system interactions, and it's just not tenable to not pay attention to that.
So tell me about the work you're doing around this topic.
So I've begun working in the city of St. Louis public schools to look at suspensions in the schools, but also academic achievement, and it's also a partnership. It's not a program. We're not bringing a solution to buildings. We believe that the beginning of this is that we need to have dialogues with the people in the schools. Talk to principals, talk to teachers, try to understand what the reality is and what they see as viable solutions. I think that very often, and this is the way I read the literature, is that we don't pay attention to the voices of the people who have to live in that reality. And since we don't pay attention, we try to put in place solutions that don't work or they work marginally, and it seems to me to be a waste of money. So we're at a point where we wanted to begin with the conversation.
So what is that reality? For those of us who haven't been in the classroom in a couple of decades or more, how have things changed? Things
have changed. In the city of St. Louis public schools, the homeless population, for example, is 40% of the kids, according to DESE's data. If a child doesn't have a place to go home at the end of the day, he's probably spending a lot of his day thinking about where he's going next, where he's going to sleep tonight, where he's going to eat, and what's that place going to be like. Where kids are faced with challenges today that are much greater than when I was a kid. The challenges that they're struggling with are often things that create trauma for them. And if we don't approach it from the standpoint of they've had traumatic experiences and let us understand that trauma, and then how do we help them to deal with that, as well as to help us to educate them, we're not going to be very successful.
So has that manifest in a less disciplined education environment? Has that manifest in a more violent student population, or have we changed our approach to discipline?
Well, I think that here's the problem. That we have a lot of kids who are born into situations that are stressful on an ongoing basis. That is having an impact on them developmentally. That it has an effect, that living in stress as a constant, it has an effect on brain architecture, it has an impact on impulsivity, emotional development. By the time kids get to school, if they've been struggling with all that life that's been going on outside of the school building, they're bringing that into the buildings. I was at a meeting just before I came here with the principals in schools that I'm working with, talking about a set of twins, for example, who have such psychological problems that they're lost for what to do with them. That they'll have them come sit in their office and just be there because they disrupt the classroom so much, and it's not, there's no alternative for them. We under-resource. So part of the work that I'm doing was built out of an equity project. So we're looking at racial equity and how that plays itself out. Schools, our urban schools, are very often under-resourced. They don't get the adequate money for counselors, for social workers, for the kinds of staff that are needed to deal with complex problems. And what winds up happening is we expect teachers to be teachers, social workers, babysitters, behavioral therapists, family specialists, and that's simply not something that we can continue to do.
So what do you make of that research we cited there, that there is that disparity racially and in other ways between how students are disciplined, between African American students, white students, et cetera?
It's huge. It's huge. I think that in part it's how we see young African American children, that there is some bias within all of us about how we see others. But the cost of that, I don't want to lay the blame solely on the teachers. The reality is that a lot of the young African American children are coming from struggling environments. Their families are struggling, and if their behavior is untenable in a school building, then we have to figure out solutions to that.
Is there research to answer the question? Because some would ask, the obvious question may be, regardless of why, are the students being suspended more, simply not misbehaving more? Or do you see research that says the same behavior by two different races gets different results?
So there is a problem there. That a lot of the suspensions, according to the data I looked at for the city, are not for type 1 offenses, so the more serious offenses, bringing weapons into schools, assaults, and that kind of thing. That they're discretionary offenses. And those discretionary offenses have led to almost 80% of the suspensions that we're seeing in the city of St. Louis schools, for example. It means the choice is being made. So part of our project, or the work we're doing, I hate to call it a project, the partnership we have is about trying to get the teachers to understand, the school personnel to understand the nature of life in the community that the kids come from, that understanding the trauma that they've experienced, and to become more sensitive to how do I help them to deal with what it is that's going on, that the behavior is just a manifestation of something else that might be happening.
Norman, thank you very much. Stay with us.